Welcome everybody to this session on redefining quality engineering with the power of AI. Firstly, I'd like to thank Vindhya for this insightful session on AI-powered visual testing, and then how that visual testing can truly be transformed with AI. With that, we also get a perfect into introducing our new session. Firstly, I'd like to say that during this session, we'll go into details of how AI will transform quality engineering practices and how we can move from a very manual driven work to a more autonomous ways of working. With that, just a quick introduction about myself. Been a part of BrowserStack for about 4 years now. I started off my journey in BrowserStack as a product manager for our revenue engineering and our website, and then very quickly have transitioned into product strategy over the last 3 years. And me and my team, we look at all the new growth initiatives, new products that are launched by BrowserStack over the last 3-4 years. So that's a quick introduction about myself, and would love to welcome Kiran, who has taken out the time to speak to us. Kiran is a VP of Engineering at Publicis Sapient. And with that, Kiran, I'd hand it off to you to quickly sort of introduce yourself before we get started for this discussion.
Thanks, Anshu, and thanks for the entire BrowserStack team for having me here. And myself, Kiran Raichoti. So I've been associated with the IT industry for the last couple of decades. So primarily, I've been into working into automation, DevOps, and recently with the GenAI, right? And also different kinds of GenAI platforms, where we started working with the clients and in terms of the implementation, in terms of doing exploration and doing a new way of working, right, with GenAI across the globe. So I'm fortunate enough to have the opportunity to work on these platforms, right, in the initial get-go, right, with various clients across the industries. So, and I hope today our discussion will definitely help for some of you folks who are looking for GenAI related quality engineering practices, and happy to be here.
Sim, thanks a lot, Kiran. I myself am super excited for the upcoming conversation. With that, as you said, right, Gen AI and all the AI features that are coming in, right? They are sort of they're really transforming how we interact with applications, right? Like the interfaces that we know today, which is, let's say, the websites the way it exists today, or mobile applications the way it exists today, could just completely be transformed, right? While instead of using workflows and clicks, you could just move into interacting with applications, which is simple text and voice, right? So what I feel is fundamentally the way applications are built is going to be changed with LLMs and generative AI technologies coming in. That being said, how do you feel, or how do you think that quality assurance or quality engineering has to change and match up to this level of this sort of new way of how applications are going to be built, right? And secondly, what about our current set of websites, right? With, like, let's say, with coding agents coming in, there's so much productivity and efficiency enhancement on the engineering side. How do you see Gen AI tools sort of impact the efficiency of our current quality engineering practices, right? So any thoughts on that?
Sure. Right. See, I think one of the good thing that is happening in the domain, right, is in the quality engineering domain is quality engineering is going through a dramatic shift of transformation, right? So with AI coming in, right, the Gen AI coming in, so the way how people were testing, right, or the quality engineering practices were set up, right? So that is going to change drastically, right? So in terms of how we are testing the applications, right? So earlier it is all more about right, so reactive mode of right way of testing, right? So when I say reactive way of testing, so people will find something in production in applications websites, then they will react to it saying that, oh, we got this issue, now what we need to do. They will try to take some preventive measures, but after the issue has happened, right? But the way how we should look at right now the transformation with Gen AI coming is, it is actually more proactive way of doing things, right? So that means using the Gen AI, I should be able to tell what are the hotspots in the application, what are the probable issues that are going to come, so that I'll take care of those issues now, right? So with this, the advantage is the cost of fixing a defect is much, much less in the Gen AI world compared with the cost of fixing the same defect without Gen AI world. right? So because once it goes to production, it becomes too expensive for anything, right, to fix it. And it actually impacts the brand reputation, it impacts the customer experience, right? It impacts a lot of things, right? So this in a way, right, I put it this as a more of a, now the quality engineering is becoming more of a preventive practices rather than detection practices, because testing is more famous for identifying defects, right? Many testers, right, if you go and ask any tester what is your proud moment, immediately the tester will say, okay, I found one P1 issue or I found one P2 issue, right, in the application. That used to be a proud moment, right? But now that context is also changing, because
Yeah,
the proud moment is how I was able to prevent a P1 rather than finding a P1, right? That's the entire paradigm is changing, right? That's the major shift is happening.
got it. No, that makes absolute sense, right? So in a way, what you're saying is that whatever was shift left movement that was there to go for like move earlier in the development cycle with Gen AI, that's just going to be accelerated, right? So we're going to go more
Yes.
and more into prevention rather than detection post-production, right?
And we are bringing customer as well, right? Very close to the application, right? So because earlier it was like I interact an application just like an application, right? For me, application actually doesn't have any, for the lack of other better word, right? Application doesn't have any emotion, right?
Yep.
Because application is just I go there, I do my work, I just do few clicks, then I go to some, if it is an e-commerce, I go to checkout and I'll just do a order placement, right?
Yeah.
But nowadays, these any kind of retail apps or travel apps, right? So they are bringing more of a right engaging user, right? The engagement of user is becoming very high, right? For
Yep.
example, I can take very small example here. I was actually booking some travel tickets, right, for my family the other day, right? And when I went to the website, and in the website, when I'm actually doing, I wanted a particular filters to be applied. But when I go to the main filters, there are no filters available. Then I thought, how come this filter is not there? And how come this filter is not there? I was just thinking. Then I surprised to see there is a prompt box next to the filter. And there actually, the website is allowing me to add the prompt. Then immediately I just did a prompt saying that I need these conditions, right, for the ticket. Right. So I was booking an international ticket. Then I said, these are the stops I needed. These are the time duration I needed. This is the price I needed, right? So immediately the filter got applied and I got all my whatever I was looking for, right? So that's because I was more engaged now. Now, if you ask me that particular website, I will not forget that website at all, even if you ask me after 10 years, because that actually engaged me a lot.
Oh, absolutely. Left an imprint on you. And more than that, it made you feel like your choices and your preferences are something that they are not going to now take into account. And it's not just a bunch of dumb button clicks, in some sense, right? No, that's actually very interesting. And taking that as a segue into our next discussion, right? What we've seen is fundamentally, as you mentioned, right? There are a lot of like with the advent of AI and sort of looking at productivity and efficiency in the development cycle, right? One of the biggest things that sort of took the whole market by wave was this onset of this huge coding agents, right? There was GitHub Copilot, there was Cursor, which is all of these are just growing, right? Then the second aspect of it was like, let's say products like Lovable, which are just helping you create websites right from the scratch, right? So one of the first practices that came about in engineering was how do we automate our test scripts, right? That was one of the first problems we took, which I think was definitely sort of accelerated because of the coding agents coming in, where SDETs were sort of first to adopt all of that, right? What are some of the other sort of aspects where you feel like AI is going to transform the day-to-day life of a quality engineer, right? Which will help them. Of course, writing test scripts is one, but what are the others? Like as you mentioned, we're going to work more towards prevention. So what are some of the other aspects that will help in that besides, let's say, or a test script writing, which is in some sense already pretty prevalent?
Yeah, that's a good question, Anshu. Right. See, right now, what is happening is automation is definitely an interesting point, right? Because in the industry also, if you look at, right, still there are many organizations, they are not matured in test automation, right? And one of the primary reason, because everybody has goals now, everybody has aspirations, right? But the way how they have to meet the goals, the way how they have to meet their aspirations in terms of automation goals here in the context, right? So the only thing they used to throw at the meeting a goal is people. That is how it used to happen, right? That means I'll hire like 10 people, I'll automate everything in the next 9 months, and I will have my automation regression suite or automation suite ready so that I can run it before releasing anything to production, right? That means we are throwing people at the problem. That used to be the
Right.
case, right? Earlier. But now it is not throwing people at the problem. It is more about, right, throwing the technology at the problem, right? Because that is where the goals are getting realized. Because earlier, one of the biggest, use case, right, for the Zen AI is in sprint automation, right? Within sprint, generally, QA takes or the quality engineering domain takes a lot of pride in doing automation along with parallelly with the development. Because whenever your development is completing, at the same time you are doing your automation, then when the code is ready, you also have your automation ready. Then through DevOps pipeline, you can actually flush out all the testing and everything, right, in automated fashion. Then your release cycle will shrink, right? This is the in sprint concept, and many people are trying in many different ways to achieve this, right? In a perfect way. But there is no perfect way, and there are so many still ifs and buts are there to meet the timelines, right? To meet, especially in sprint. I think this is one area where Zenai is going to help a lot. And because the way how Zenai works, right, is it is going to give a lot of speed. It is going to give a lot of coverage. All right, these two things, right? And the third thing is the quality, because generally in quality engineering, right, I look at aerial view, right? In the aerial view, you need to look at speed always. You need to look at the value that you are actually looking at, and you need to look at the quality, right? And speed and value is going to give by ZenAI, right? Because of a lot of platforms that we have, like you mentioned, for example, Cursor, or for
Yeah.
example, when if it is OpenAI, right? So we do have a lot of solutions where we can actually expedite the automation process. But only one thing we need to add here is human in the loop. The quality aspect will come when there is a human in the loop, right? Because whatever ZenAI is giving you, still you need a human in the loop for one round of review and making sure that you don't need additional information, right? Because it gives a lot of additional information as well. That's where combination of human in the loop is required, though 90% of the job is done by ZenAI, right? So that's where you're getting a speed now. That is the major problem is getting resolved for sprint automation in sprint automations, right? And the second biggest, right, use case, right, for this is earlier it all like when our development is doing coding, they used to generate too much of code, right? A heavy code. And as per the code, right, the QE teams, what they do generally is they go and do regression testing on that particular code, right? Whether it is
Mhm.
functional testing, regression automation testing, everything they do. But here
Yeah.
now the advantage what you will have is you can actually do a targeted based automation testing rather than
Mm.
doing a generic based. When it is a targeted based, when I say depending on the code, right, we can generate similar test cases. The test
Makes
cases can be automated, right, instantly, and it can be run as well, right? So that way you're actually completely speeding up the cycle of sprint and release. That's the biggest shifts, right, that are happening. And there are many people who are, I mean, already using ZenAI for test case designs, for
Mhm.
example, generating automation scripts, right, and also identifying the targeted regression. So some
Yeah.
of these are good use cases are happening.
No, absolutely. It makes so much sense, right? Because I fundamentally believe that testing is very context driven, right? And I
Context.
feel much more than some of the other areas because you have to stitch so many pieces of data together, right? Right from, let's say, your design files to your PRDs. So as you mentioned that how coverage is a very big factor, in terms of speeding up your in sprint automation, where your reliability on human becomes much lower, right? So that I completely agree with you. And I think even the second one, which comes to let's test case selection, which is what you mentioned, right?
Yeah.
Like how do Gen AI help you only detect those focus areas, right? All of those will definitely help in speed as well. And I think it gives us a good entry point into my next thought as well. As you mentioned, like 90% of it will be done by Gen AI, and like 10% is where you need human in the loop, right? That was what I was thinking about, right? Like with all these new shifts in technology is going to help us move much faster. But what are some of the guardrails that, like an organization should put? Of course, human in the loop is one, but are there any other sort of processes or any kind of factors that they put to sort of balance, what is the quality versus the speed, right? You don't want to end up shipping too fast and then everything sort of bursting in production, right? So what are some of the checks and quality in place, considering the technology is still nascent, right? So what are your thoughts regarding that?
Yeah, so in this case, right, so everyone definitely should have a training on Gen AI, right? So that is one of the fundamental step, right, for somebody getting into working with Gen AI solutions, because the reason being, Gen AI will give a lot of right, based on the prompt, it will give the for example, it will give the outcome, right, the output, right? And based on the output, right, sometimes there could be a bias, right? I mean, now they're handling bias in a different ways, but or there could be some kind of ethics issue as well can come in, right? So that is what only human only can actually detect some of those things, right? So based on the context of their domain or context of their application, right? So I think one is ethics in the AI is very important. When I say that the outcome, whatever it is coming, there should be some review in terms of how we are going to review and making sure that there is no bias in the outcome that is coming from Gen AI, and also making sure that, right, so there is no irrelevant data that is getting generated, right?
Mhm.
So and guardrails perspective, right? So one of the approach we defined, right, is we have actually defined around 9 parameters, and those 9 parameters are like adjectives, right?
See.
So 9 adjectives we defined and say that these are the 9 parameters that you should check whenever you are getting a response from the AI, right? So that to make sure that you have the guardrails in terms of the one security, for example, right? Number two is like I said, the bias, right, things. Second one and third one is any on the ethical side as well, right? So we need to look at. So there are like we defined like around 8 to 9 parameters, right? So these has to be checked, right? And the training for every individual is will required, right? Otherwise, the problem what will happen is if you churn a lot of code, right, even automation code,
Mhm.
at some point of time it becomes like huge maintenance, right?
Yeah.
Because now you are let's say Gen AI today, any platform, right, for that matter, even if it is an OpenAI or Cursor or any platform is giving you huge code, right? Lots of code it is giving in fraction of seconds. You just
Yes.
take it and put it into the test suite and you will start okay executing your test cases down the line. Let's say after 6 months, after or 1 year, you will have hundreds of thousands of lines of code, right? So, and the maintenance will become a big issue if we don't have a right structure, if we don't have the right strategy in place. That is where I think is strategy as well is required, and the data that it generates also we need to make sure that that is the relevant data, right? It is not something irrelevant, right? So these things, I think some of these things I think needs to be taken care.
Makes sense. No, completely resonate with what you're saying, because we have seen that a lot, even like, let's say in internal practice, or even when I like sort of use Gen AI for my own work related stuff, right? There are so many times you just have to make sure that the output, and our work is so research heavy, right? So we have to, we can't always take it at face value. And I feel like that is the same for every application. There is some element of validity that you have to make sure, because fundamentally LLMs are always trying to answer, right? They are never going to say I'm wrong. So you always have to make sure that what they are saying is in some level, some checks and guards put in place. And very interesting, you mentioned around test data, right? You have to validate around the test data and the accuracy as well. And what we've seen in the market and some of our customers say is one of their biggest challenges actually comes in their strategy overall, is how do they A, generate that data, B, maintain it, and any output, like let's say that comes out of the LLM, how do you sort of test that as well, right? So those three aspects of data, right? One on the input side, one on the output side, are big challenges for organizations. So have you seen that in your experience? If yes, how have you sort of mitigated? What are some of the strategies that you think organizations can take to mitigate the risks of test data?
Yeah, this is a very interesting point, right? Which is again very close to me as well, because the reason being we always deal with the test data issues, right? In any testing programs, if you look at, I think especially if it is a large enterprise applications, if you're working with, whether it could be retail applications, it could be some financial banking applications, right? So the bigger beast would be the test data, right?
Mhm.
And for test data, there are a lot many tools are available in the market, right? So again, I don't want to name the tools, but any tool if you take, right, the minimum price starts from bare minimum price, even if the tool starts, right, having basic features, it will start from at least around 40K USD, right? The price of any test data tools, right? And it's very expensive, right? That is, I'm talking about some tool having very basic features. If you're going for little more advanced features and all, it used to be like 100K, right? So, and less than that, you don't get a product in the market, right? So with GenAI coming in, right? So some of the test data problems it is going to solve, right? If it is, for example, a synthetic data problem, right? So let's take any non-functional testing, right? Like performance testing, for example, right? So in the performance testing, you create huge data sets, right? So because you have to do with millions of data, the performance testing, right? For any enterprise application. So there actually GenAI can be used to generate a lot of synthetic data. So I actually had one, my own use case, the right that I have used GenAI. We were creating for one of our retail client a huge data set we need to create, because in production we had an expectation of getting 450 millions of data records of data, right? So then we need to generate the same amount of data to test it how the solution behaves for 450 million of data.
Wow.
Right? So there we actually used the GenAI solution to generate the data. So the data process, everything we got completed right in hardly 3 working days. Right. So in 3 days, we were able to complete generating the data and also segregating the data and getting the right outcome, right, for the data. So that way, right? So it's very helpful, right? Otherwise, let's say if I don't have any GenAI solution, right? Then I need to rely on any market tools, right? Where, like I said, which is going to be super expensive. So this GenAI coming in, what it has done, some of the good thing is it actually democratized like a lot of these solutions, right? Which were earlier very super expensive solutions. It actually came and democratized some of these solutions, right? So that way it becomes very easy. Let's say you're doing not just the performance testing, right? Let's say if you are running any mock based, for example, the APIs are not ready, third-party APIs, and we have to run a mock, right, for any particular transactions. So the mock data, everything can be generated through GenAI, right? But again, still, I would say from security standpoint, some of the PII information like personal identification information and all security related that we don't generate with GenAI, right? Because again, every organization will have their own security policies. So we will not be able to generate some of the, capability wise, we can generate, but we generally don't intend to generate those kind of informations, right? So PIA level informations. But apart from that, regular transaction level data, right? If it is some email IDs, names, and all, right? Which are like using only for purely testing purpose in the lower environments, that can be generated, right? So that way, GenAI is going to help a lot in test data, which is one of the core problem, right, in testing engagements.
It makes a lot of sense. So if I understood that correctly, what you're saying, one is actually just generating data to maybe get more statistically relevant sample. The other one, what I've heard or seen a couple of customers say is that they don't, as you mentioned, not want to generate PII data. But the other one is masking as well, right? For security and privacy concerns, like where you, let's say, if it's a healthcare company, they might have like 10,000 worth patient data available. But even when they want to move that production data to, let's say, staging data, masking is a very big problem for them.
Yes,
So is that a
absolutely.
concern that you've seen as well, like where it's not just like relevant samples, but more like types of data also?
Yeah. So data masking again, right? So is one of the key activity when we dump the data from production to the lower environments, right? Because without data masking, we can't use the data because it will have all the production data. So in data masking, you have different variations. So earlier data masking, if you have to do, either we do with the DB scripts, right, which is again used to be a very DB person oriented work, right? So right. So what generally testing teams used to do is they go and they actually get somebody from the DBA, they get the DB dump, and also they will look at the scripts, they'll create the scripts. It used to be a huge activity, right? So like it is like it in itself, it is like a small mini project, right? So we have to do it everything from zero, right? And like I said, tools are expensive to do this, right? So the other way actually, right, so doing is having GenAI, the one of the biggest advantage that you will have is once you get the data, right? If you have to do data masking, for example, not encryption, because in data masking, you have again different variations. One you can do directly encryption. One you can actually change the names and write, for example, append or prefix or suffix the names, and you will turn it into a test data from a production data. So those things can be easily handled, right? So using the Zen AI, right? So that way you will get more advantage. Like I said earlier, right? The moment it becomes more democratized, what will happen is the Kiwi person, whoever is working, right, in that particular, for example, project, will have more power now, right? So from a skill set perspective, right? Earlier, it is all like the person has to depend on multiple teams, right, for getting the things done. Now, the Kiwi person will have more power, right? Having Gen AI, right, as a companion for that person, right? So then it will give more additional skills, right, without depending on a lot of multiple cross-functional teams.
Oh, I completely agree. And I genuinely feel like with AI, I think QA engineers and SDETs will get democratized on multiple facets, not just testing, right? But really getting them to think out of the box and see what else could they do for improving quality. While we're on the topic of data and sort of security related to data, I just had one question in my mind, which I always wondered for large enterprises like Publicis as well, is where does sort of security and governance come into play when, let's say, you are using Gen AI applications? Because there is going to be some amount of, like, let's say, data that is going in and data that is coming out, which is like, let's say, even if we were talking about masking, right? Even for masking, you have to send that 10,000 patient data to a third party provider, which is an LLM, and there might be certain security risks with that, which is why organizations may or may not do. Besides that, PII, are there any other types of data, or in general, what is sort of the thought process regarding security and compliance when it comes to using Gen AI internally, or any of the other products or models based on LLM? So what are your thoughts on that aspect?
So this is actually one of the, I would say, the recently interesting topic, security approvals, right, for using ZenAI application, because we do face this often because as a consulting company, we work with different clients, right? And every client organization has their own security policies, right? So in some cases, a client will have a particular clause, like, for example, this particular LLM should not be used, right? Because maybe they will have some reason, right, justification for not using that particular LLM, right? Some
Right.
client will have saying that as when you use LLM, you are going on internet, so it should not be used, right? The LLM should not be used. So in case to case basis, right? So we do have a very right, robust security policies in place, right? So how to these kind of solutions to be used? Like for example, there are different models, but I'll mention 2, 3 examples. Like one example is like you don't need to be on the internet, right? So what we do is the LLM itself will make it a local, right? So when you make it a local, then you're not interacting with the internet. That is one, right? Second thing is you have a lot of vector DB now. So I'll just take the complete repo, right, from the client and make it as a part of the vector DB. So then you're interacting only that particular client information in that vector DB, where only that particular project people will have the access, right? So no other will have the access, right? So that is another foolproof thing, right, that will happen, right? And another thing, again, one thing now recently is happening is, so I mean, as a part of the Zen AI, right, solutions implementation, domain specific libraries are coming now, right? So library or prompt, right? Library in the sense the prompt library, I meant to say, right? So the prompts earlier used to be very generic, right? Tester, so for example, something I want a test case design, I'll just put some 2 prompts, I'll get the design. Or I need a Selenium script, I'll just do a prompt. Or I need a Playwright script, I'll just do a prompt and get the script, right? It is like a task oriented, right? So that means it is a kind of ad hoc task oriented. Now things are getting into more perspectives now, right? With the LLMs being used. So now the teams actually started creating a domain-based or a project-based library. That means if I'm working in a particular project, right? So I have like 25, 30 member team. So everybody will be working on the same application, like same domain. If it is a, for example, banking, let's say a banking application, right? So in the banking, right, everybody will be working on some sort of similar applications, right? All the 30 member team. So whenever they're doing a prompt, that prompt can be actually stored, all the prompts, whatever the users are using, right? So that means over a period of time, the LLM actually will train itself that, okay, I'm getting prompts from these many people and it is all relevant to the applications they are working on. So the accuracy, the relevancy will increase as you move along, right? So first couple of months, it may not give a lot of accuracy, but after third month and fourth month, right, the relevancy response will actually increase a lot, so that you no need to even tell, right, whenever you're giving a prompt, that you need that these certain specifics actually to be included, right, for that particular application, because you would have already learned that application by now,
Right.
right? So
Yeah, makes
these
sense.
are some of the things, right? So which are being put in place. So I mean, definitely still security is a big concern across many, I would say, clients. But
Mhm.
I mean, slowly it takes some time for people to adopt to it, right? It is a little slow process when it comes to security, right? Because the main thing is there are some of the things are like unknowns from the organization perspective, right? So they still think that it is going to internet if the information is going. For example, if it is a financial any institution, right? They will not that easily give the information outside, right? There will be a lot of security policies will be there, right? So it's a slow adoption from security standpoint, but I'm sure everyone will get there, right? It's a matter of time.
No, absolutely. And I think it's that curve that we are in, right? Any new technological disruption goes through a adoption curve where security comes in a bit later in terms of trust, basically. So I think it'll happen with time. Just one last question from my side. We've discussed so many of these different types of strategies of adoption of Gen AI in our internal quality engineering practices, but there is still sort of this it's a bit of a, I feel like the uptick is a bit slower in terms of adoption, right? Or there are still a lot of organizations which are struggling how to get to faster adoption with AI driven quality engineering or AI driven processes, right? So for organizations who want to make that switch, right, what are some of the faster practices they can start with? So in your advice, if they have to move towards adoption, what are some of the things that they should, start with to get that ROI or of investment, basically?
Sure. See, I think one of the thing, right, I feel particularly with the context of quality engineering domain, right? I mean, some of these are across all, but with the context of right quality engineering domain, right? The first and foremost thing is the mindset, right? Because
Yes.
I still feel many people, right? Because I work with a lot of clients, right? So I still feel many people still have the apprehension that using Zen AI, right, is a risky, or using Zen AI, right? For example, my coverage may not be good. Using Zen AI, it will give a lot of outcome, right? For example, or the output, right? Where it will give so many test cases or so many number of test cases, which I may not be able to test, or I may not be able to consume that, right? So there is a lot of nuances are there for the people, right, who still has apprehension, right, in adopting it, right? I think it's a mindset shift that is required in this domain, right? One, still a lot of people have the notion of, right, when I work with a lot of other people, right, what they think is, right, if we actually run thousands of test cases, right, before anything goes to production, people will
Right.
feel very happy because, oh, you have done thousands of test cases, so everything should be good. But it is not about the volume, right? It is more about the value.
Absolutely.
Right now, still that volume thought is there in many of the testing practices, right? That
Right.
means I need to automate so many number of test cases. I need to run so many number of right, test executions, right, for a release, right? And I need
Mhm.
to write hundreds of test designs I need to do. Then my quality is good, right? I think that's still kind of mindset stuck is there, right? For in some, I have seen in many places, right? So
Right.
mindset shift is the biggest thing that has to, right? First people has to come out of that, right? That means
Right.
it is going to help me. It is going to be my good companion. With Gen AI, I'm going to be more powerful with Gen AI than how I am earlier, right? I think that mindset shift is required. That is the reason some organizations are adopting very slow. That is the
Mhm.
one biggest thing, right? Second thing is about the training, right? When it comes to training, people should definitely understand what is a prompt engineering, right? So now
Right.
prompt engineering, its prompt was started as a very casual chat kind of text messages, but now prompt engineer, it actually developed into like a branch, right? Like a prompt
Yep.
engineering it is, right?
Yeah.
There are courses, certifications are happening in prompt engineering, right? So I think how to use the LLM, how to do the right prompt, right? And how to validate it. Like earlier, we talked about few things, right? Like bias based, ethics based, and all, how the
Yes.
response should be
Yes.
validated. I think these trainings are as well required for the people who are going to work or adopt Zen AI, right? So that is very, very important, right? the second one. And the third one, right, is about the more on the design skill or thinking power of the people should increase. Right now, what will happen is in the testing domain, most of the times people tend to do only execution. Their always mindset is, oh, I'll write like 100 test cases, I'll execute 100 test cases, then I am proud of, or I'll log, let's say, some 20 defects, right?
Yeah.
So this is all revolving around this. I write test cases, I execute test cases, I find defects. I think I think people has to come out of that shell and think beyond it, right? More, I mean, now it would be more like a strategic thinker, right? Every tester should become like a strategic thinker. I have a lot of tools now who will like work for me, and how I leverage these tools to make myself productive, to make more quality for the application of the organization, right? I
Absolutely.
think that those are the things shifts, right? So main thing required more than the technical skill, right? I think these are the other side of the technical skills are required, right? How you think, right? How you strategize, how you design, right? So, and what is the quality gates that you apply, right? I think these things are more important than training them in any programming languages, right? When you want to adopt across the organization.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I think, especially with your point around prompt engineering, I think, or prompts in general, even like when I started, it was just any kind of language. But now, as you work more and more with LLMs, you realize that there is a certain form of technique to it, right? Which I feel every person who's working in any application or any facet has to learn, right? That is a skill that is going to be very relevant for anybody, and that kind of an upskilling in some sense is required for every function in software development, right? Whether it's design or whether it's QA or whether it's development as well. I think so. I couldn't agree more with what you've said, and I think I do feel like organizations will have to make that belief and trust that GenAI is there to help them, and then how do you, as you said, right, solve more complex problems and solve probably uh, like just change their way of thinking a little bit. I think that kind of shift needs to come through. And that'll probably, I feel, will be very valuable for organizations. I think with that, I think that brings us to the end of this super exciting and insightful session for me, Kiran. I had an incredible time just talking to you and learning so much about how organizations are adopting Gen AI and what do quality engineering teams can really do to make an impact with AI in quality so that the end application just becomes much more powerful, much more faster, like, right? No bugs, much faster. That's sort of that kind of an approach. But thanks a lot, Kiran. Any last words from your side before we sort of close the session?
See, I mean, for anyone who want to be more, right, adopt even GenAI or any latest technology, right? For me, one important thing I would maybe my 2 cents of suggestion, right, to all whoever is watching or looking at this session, right, is for me, unlearning is more important than learning, right? At least that is my personal experience, and I would reiterate that many times. I used
Yeah,
to tell my team as well, unlearning is very, very important, right? So if
yeah,
you don't unlearn, then you can't apply the new thing, right? So right
absolutely.
now, that is the biggest challenge in the domain, right? Is people are not able to unlearn, right?
Yes,
I write test case like this, I have test case should have 25 steps, then only I'm happy, right? That unlearning has to come, then automatically the success will come, right? That's one of my suggestion to all who is watching. And thanks, Anshu. Thanks having me and the entire BrowserStack team. Thanks for the opportunity.
awesome. Well, the pleasure was all ours. So thanks a lot.